Happy Monday. Thank you for joining me for this week's Unlocking the Magic of Leadership. Now, for the next 6 weeks, we are going to be looking at different types of neurodivergence. So for the next 2 weeks, we're going to be diving into autism. Then 2 weeks after that, we will be looking at ADHD. And then 2 weeks after that, we will be looking at Tourette's. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about, no matter which one we are talking about, this will be very clear across all of them, and I will make sure at the beginning of every video, if I remember to share this, we are talking about it in adults in the workplace and high functioning. So all of these pieces tend to be across a spectrum. Because we're looking at it from the leadership perspective, it's going to be a smaller portion of that spectrum. I'm also doing research and trying to make sure that everything that I say is accurate and truthful and inclusive. I may make mistakes. If I make mistakes, call me on them. Let's have a conversation. This is something new. I'm learning about it, trying to do the best that I can, but I may make mistakes. If I do make a mistake, feel free. Call me on it in the comments, send me an email, let me know where those areas are so that I can do better next time. But no, if I do make a mistake, it is not intentional, and I will do my best to repair it in the future. All right, so with that, let's talk about autism. So this first week is going to be uncovering what autism is, the way that it may show up in adults in the workplace, and then tips for you as a leader, what you can do about it. So the definition of autism is a neurodevelopmental condition of variable severity with lifelong effects that can be recognized from early childhood, characterized by difficulties with social interaction and communication, and by restricted or repetitive patterns of thought and behavior. Oh, that's a mouthful. So when we think about autism in layman's term, autism is a different way of thinking. So if you think about your computer systems, you have a PC and you have a Mac. Both of them do the same thing. They tend to get to the same conclusions, but the way they get there is different. Each of them has their strengths. Each of them has their opportunities. It's the same way when we think about autism. The brain, our processor, processes differently for those that have autism than it does for those that have neurotypical thinking. Now, some of the ways that autism may show up in the workplace. So when we think about opportunities with autism, ways that autism would show up that would be very distinct from neurotypical behaviors is one around communication. So those that are on the autism spectrum disorder tend to be literal. They do not understand sarcasm. They tend to be very direct, and they can get confused by other people's emotions. I remember having a conversation with my leader about 8 years ago, and I told her it's not that I don't understand social cues. I see all of them, and I don't know what to do with it, so it gets overwhelming, so I just choose not to focus on it. So an adult with autism will show up and you will see things like maybe they have difficulty making conversation, or maybe they have difficulty making small talk. Maybe if they're not interested in the topic, they're just not going to have the conversation. Don't understand sarcasm, very literal, emotions of others are confusing, and then repetitive behaviors. So speaking on my behalf, one of the things is I would always pick up on patterns. And if my hands aren't moving, something is wrong. Now, I grew up before the era of being able to fidget. So fidgeting in the workplace, I could sit still. But when I sat still, I was focusing so hard on sitting still, that was hard for me to pay attention. So when I could actually fidget and move my hands, then I would have a better shot of paying attention. You may see tapping, you may see like the knee bobbing. There could be a lot of different repetitive behaviors for individuals that are on the autism spectrum. Now, the strengths of some individual in the workforce that has ASD. Some of those strengths is when they are interested in something, they can learn massive amounts of information about that thing that they are interested in. For example, my thing is leadership. I am obsessed with leadership. My bachelor's, master's, and my upcoming PhD will all be in leadership. I want to go as deep as possible and understand every single thing about leadership. Now, how to, decorate a room in my house, I know nothing. It is overwhelming. I don't want to know anything about it. So when we think about ASD, a lot of times we can go very, very deep in those things that we're interested in. If we're not interested in it, it can be more of a challenge. Now, those with autism are less likely to judge others. We tend not to conform to social norms. And so when somebody is breaking a social norm, one, we may have found our people, but also it's not going to stick out in the way that it would for somebody neurotypical that follows those social norms. So those with autism tend to be less judgmental. They also tend to be very honest, brutally honest. So one of the things that I would always tell my employees is don't ask the question unless you want the answer. I cannot lie, even when I want to. I cannot lie. It is not a trait that I possess. And so many times individuals with autism, if you ask them a question, you are going to get the answer ready or not. So just be prepared for that. Those with autism can come across as very direct, sometimes brutally so, and it's not intentional. It's just understanding that part of our processor is that we don't pick up on emotions. We tend to come across as very logical and analytical. So that emotional piece isn't as prevalent for us as it can be for others. And then finally, those with autism, we have very unique thought processes. So if you're trying to find a solution to a problem that you're just like, nobody's been able to find a solution, we may be able to help with that. Because we don't look at things the same way, we can see solutions that a neurotypical individual may not be able to see. This is great in moments of chaos. This can be frustrating when you would like a more typical answer. So know that it is definitely a strength in certain areas and it can be frustrating in other areas. Now, as a leader, if you have somebody that has autism spectrum disorder on your team, here are some high-level pieces, tools that you can put in your toolbox. Caveat though, the very first piece is meet them where they are. We started this by saying that if you have 100 people on the spectrum, it will show up 100 unique and distinct ways. So meet them where they are. Use this as a starting point for communication and then adjust and adapt based on what the individual in front of you is telling you. All right. So the first piece, say what you mean. This individual is not going to be a mind reader. They're not going to be picking up on your social cues the way that others are. So if you want them to do something, be very specific as to what that thing is. I can remember one of the first times I got feedback when I was working at Disney, and the feedback, boiling it down, was essentially I needed to be less me than I had been. I still don't know what that means. And I know that when I left, I was super frustrated, and so was my leader. He thought he was being clear, telling me to be less than what I currently am, did nothing for me. So be very, very specific in your communication. Provide meaningful feedback. I can say that in very few cases, when I hurt people's feelings, was it intentional or wanted? I don't like to hurt people, but I hurt people regularly when I was a first leader because I was very direct and very blunt and didn't have that softer approach yet. And so having leaders who were willing to give me that feedback and say,
hey, maybe you meant this, but this is how it came across,
was life-changing. So don't be afraid to give feedback. Avoid words or phrases that are too familiar. Honey, sweetie, baby, babe, any of those, they drive me insane. Unless you are on in my inner circle, don't do that. And so if you're leading individuals that are on the autism spectrum disorder, avoid those familiar phrases. I'm not saying you have to keep it formal, but you want to err on the side of formality until you build the relationship. Once you're in my inner circle, if you call me honey or babe or whatever, it may register that you did it, but it's not going to bother me. So just be aware as you're going into those. If you're naturally a honey, baby, sweetie type individual, then just use a little bit of caution with that. And then finally, just to repeat it, meet them where they are. That is the best thing that you can give all of your employees, is to meet them where they are. Use this as a starting point and then adapt based on the information that they're showing you. All right. Thank you for joining me for this week's Unlocking the Magic of Leadership. Have an absolutely amazing week and join us next week as we debunk the myths of autism. As always, don't forget, you got this. I'll see you next week.